The lathe makes round things. That is its gift and its limit, a spinning workpiece, a stationary cutter, and every shape that follows from that arrangement, cylinders, tapers, bores, threads. The whole first year of Iron Ridge's machine works had been built on that single truth, and it had taken us further than I had any right to expect. But engines need more than round. They need flat faces to seal against, square slots to key a shaft, housings to cradle a bearing, gear blanks to be toothed into motion. The lathe cannot make those things, not truly. You can approximate them with files and chisels and a steady hand, and I had watched Mok Jae and the others do exactly that. Watch them spend a full morning producing a slot that was still crooked by a hair's width, then spend another morning correcting it, then accept something that was close enough because there was no better way. There was a better way. There had always been a better way. The mill flips the lathe, I told the crew when I gathered them at the sketchboard. I had drawn it in ash on a flat piece of slate, the rough proportions of what I had in mind. A spinning tooth cutter, the work on a table that moves true in 3 directions. It makes everything the lathe can't. I had built milling machines before, in my grandfather's shop, in the restoration work we did on old equipment that came in rusted and seized. I had never built one from raw iron and wood and the output of a single forge. But that was the situation, and the situation was what it was. The design was straightforward in principle and unforgiving in practice. The table had to move in 3 axes, left and right, front and back, up and down, and each axis had to be true, not approximately true, true. A table that drifted even slightly as it traversed would cut a surface that looked flat and wasn't, and every part made on it would carry that error forward into every machine built from those parts, and every machine built from those machines. Error compounds. That is the first lesson of precision work, and the one most people learn too late. The ways, the sliding surfaces the table rode on would have to be scraped. There was no other method available to us. Scraping is slow, meditative work. You coat a reference surface with a thin film of marking compound, press the workpiece against it, read the high spots the compound transfers to the metal, and cut those spots away with a hand scraper, a few thousandths at a time. Then you repeat. You repeat until the contact pattern is even across the whole surface, until the high spots and low spots have been worked into a single continuous flat that will slide without binding and hold without rocking. It takes days for a single surface. The mill had 3 sets of ways. Chae-young received this information without any visible distress. 3 sets of ways to scrape true this time, not 1, she said, already studying the sketch. She had her head tilted at the angle she used when she was calculating something by feel, some ratio of effort to result that she carried in her hands rather than her head. The bigger they get, the more there is to keep honest. She said it the way another person might note that rain was coming, a fact to be dealt with, not a complaint. The shafts and spindles came from the lathe, turned to dimension, and checked against Seirin's gauges. The threaded feed screws, the lead screws that would drive the table along each axis, came from the lathe as well, cut with the same threading attachment we had built in the early months. Every component of the mill was a product of the shop's prior capabilities. That was the point. That was always the point. Each machine we built made the next machine possible, and the next machine made the one after it more precise, and the precision accumulated like interest, slowly at first, and then faster than you expected. Tae-ho forged the milling cutter. This was the heart of the machine, a toothed wheel of hardened steel that would spin against the workpiece and cut away material in controlled chips. The geometry of the teeth mattered. The hardness of the steel mattered more. Too soft and the cutter would dull on the first pass. Too hard and it would shatter under the shock of interrupted cuts. He worked the steel through the forge with the patience of a man who had stopped needing to think about the steps. The straw and bronze quench, the timing pulled just so. He had done this enough times now that his hands knew the color of the metal before his eyes fully registered it. Hard enough to cut iron, tough enough not to shatter, he said, holding the finished cutter up in the forge light and turning it slowly. The teeth caught the glow in sequence. Straw and bronze pulled just so. I could do this in my sleep now. He probably could. That was what a year of deliberate practice produced. Not speed, not strength, but the elimination of uncertainty. He no longer had to think about whether the quench was right. He knew. Sorin took the lead screws and fitted them with graduated dials, collars marked with fine divisions that translated the rotation of the screw into a readable number. One full turn of the feed handle advanced the table by a known distance. A fraction of a turn advanced it by a fraction of that distance. The number on the dial was the position of the table, not approximately, exactly. She fitted the first dial and stepped back to let Mok Jae try it. He reached for the workpiece to check its position by eye, the way he had always done. "Don't look at the metal," she said. Her voice was even, not unkind, but there was no give in it. "Look at the dial. The number is the truth now." He looked at the dial. He made the adjustment. He looked at the dial again to confirm it. The habit of trusting his eyes over the instrument was old, and it would take time to break, but he was trying, and that was enough for now. The first cut was a flat face. The cutter spun, the table fed, and the mill peeled a thin, even layer from the surface of the test block in a curl of iron that fell away clean. The resulting surface was flat in a way that no amount of filing could reliably produce, not because filing was unskillful work, but because the mill did not depend on skill. It depended on the geometry of the machine, which we had built carefully, which Chae-young had scraped true, which Seon had measured and verified. The skill was in the building. The cut itself was just the machine doing what the machine was made to do. Then a slot. The cutter plunged, the table traversed, and a square-sided channel appeared in the iron, walls perpendicular to the floor, corners crisp, width held to the number on the dial. Mok Jae stared at it. "A perfect square slot," he said. He ran his thumbnail along the edge of it, feeling the sharpness. "We always had to file those by hand, and they were always crooked." He was not wrong. He had filed hundreds of slots in the past year. Some of them had been very good. None of them had been this. The vocabulary of shapes that opened up after that first day was something I had known was coming and still found remarkable to watch. Blocks with parallel faces, keyed shafts, a slot cut along the shaft's length, a matching slot in the hub, a key fitted between them so the two turned as one. Housings bored on the lathe and then milled flat on their mounting faces. Gear blanks turned to diameter and then moved to the mill for the tooth-cutting operations we had not yet mastered, but would. Every shape that an engine or a transmission required spelled out in cuts that the mill could make and the lathe could not. The mill didn't add one capability, it added a whole language of shapes, and every machine to come was spelled in that language. Cho-young introduced the fixtures without ceremony, the way she introduced most things, by simply building one and using it, and waiting for someone to ask why. The fixture was a block of iron, scraped flat on its base, with a precisely located slot that accepted the workpiece in one orientation and no other. You placed the part, you clamped it, and the part was located, not approximately located, located. The fixture knew where true was, and it transferred that knowledge to the part without requiring the worker to find it again each time. "The fixture remembers where true is," she said when Mok Jae finally asked, "so the worker doesn't have to." He thought about that for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, the way he nodded when something had rearranged itself in his understanding. The fixtures changed the rhythm of the work. Parts that had required careful individual setup, measuring, indicating, adjusting, remeasuring, could now be loaded and clamped in the time it took to reach across the bench. The same part, made the same way, to the same number, 20 times in a row, 50 times. The count stopped mattering because the count was no longer the difficult part. Mok Jae took a part through the full sequence on his own. He forged the blank at Tae-ho's forge, turned it on the lathe, milled the flat and the slot, and brought it to the measuring room where Sorin ran it against the standards. He came back from the measuring room at a pace that was not quite running. "All of it, me," he said. He was trying to keep his voice level and not entirely succeeding. "Passed the lab on the first try, Master Do." Do-kwang was at the scraping bench, working a surface that did not strictly need his attention. He had been finding reasons to be near the work lately, now that his hands had healed enough to hold tools again. He looked up at Mok Jae's announcement. Something moved behind his expression, not quite pride, not quite satisfaction, something more complicated than either. "First try," he said. A pause. The line I held was worth holding after all. He went back to the scraping. Mok Jae stood there for another moment, holding the part, and then went to put it in the finished rack with the others. A year before, this space had been one struggling smith and a dying fire. I had arrived with nothing but the knowledge in my head and the habits my grandfather had drilled into me over a childhood spent in his restoration shop. Now there was a lathe, a mill, a scraping bench, a measuring room where truth was kept in calibrated gauges and reference standards, and a crew of cast-offs, an orphan who measured by feel, a foreman who had held a line through pain, a blacksmith who heat-treated in his sleep, an apprentice who had just passed his first full pipeline part on the first attempt. They could build to a number, not approximately, to a number. Ji Wol-yeong came in the late afternoon, when the light through the workshop's high windows had gone the color of old bronze. She moved through the space with the careful attention of someone cataloging what she saw, which was what she always did. The warden missed very little. "More every week," she said, "since your wall held." She meant the refugees, the people arriving from the surrounding valleys and the roads to the south, drawn by the rumor of a town the darkness had not taken. I had seen them at the gates in the mornings, small groups with their possessions bundled, looking at the veil with an expression I recognized as the particular relief of people who had stopped expecting to find safety and had found it anyway. "More hands," I said. "We'll need to make more of everything. Faster." Ji Wol-yeong looked at me for a moment before she spoke again. She had the manner of someone choosing the weight of her words carefully, not because she was uncertain of them, but because she wanted them to land correctly. "Rugam will come back, Smith," she said, "not to threaten this time, to end it. Build fast." She left before I could answer, which was probably intentional. There was nothing useful I could have said in response. She was right, and she knew I knew she was right, and the conversation that mattered was not the one between us, but the one between the pace of what I was building and the pace of what was coming. I stood at the mill after the crew had gone, running my hand along the table's scraped ways. The surface was cool and slightly oily, the contact pattern even across its length. Cho-young had done good work. We had all done good work. I had been thinking about the next problem for 2 days already, the way I always started thinking about the next problem before the current one was finished. The mill could cut iron, it could cut mild steel, but the hardened steel we were now producing, the steel in Tae-ho's milling cutters, in the hardened ways we were beginning to make for the more demanding applications, that steel defeated the cutter. You could not mill a surface that was harder than your tool. The cutter would dull on the first pass, and the second pass would ruin the part. Every shop that reached this point hit the same wall. The solution was not a sharper cutter. The solution was a different process entirely, one that did not cut but abraded, that used a grinding wheel of bonded abrasive to remove material from a surface harder than any steel tool could touch. I looked at the mill one more time, at the clean slot in the test block still sitting in the fixture where we had left it. "Too hard to cut," I said to the empty room. "We've hit the wall every shop hits." Tomorrow we would start on the grinder. There was no other way past it. "Tomorrow we get past it the only way there is," I said. "We learn to grind."